Welcome to the Our Hen House interview. This is Jasmine Singer.
This is Marianne Sullivan.
And we are so pleased today to welcome back to the show Sue Donaldson and Will Kymlicka. I'm going to take that sentence again.
Kymlicka. No, Kymlicka. You're right.
I was right. No, we're going to leave all this in.
Like, is this your
Kymlicka? Kymlicka. Okay.
Yeah,
Kymlicka.
So Kymlicka, Sue Donaldson and Will Kymlicka, two of the most important thinkers in the animal protection movement today, and the authors of Zoopolis, A Political Theory of Animal Rights, to talk about their latest book from Oxford University Press, which is called Animals and the Right to Politics. And we've been really excited about this interview. Before we get to that, just a super quick reminder, since if you're like me, you're forgetting everything these days, that the Our Hen House podcasts are now several times a week. We last year decided that was a good shift to make rather than having one 19-hour episode or whatever it was going for. Rising Anxieties comes out on Tuesdays, the Hen Report on Thursdays, and the long form interview on Fridays. And that's what this is. The bonus for Flock members comes out on Mondays. Remember, we are a podcast and we're on YouTube, so please subscribe and hit like wherever you listen. So welcome back to Our Hen House, Will and Sue.
Thank you. We're thrilled to be here.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, we're super excited about picking your brain. And I think that, congratulations, by the way, on your new project and just putting it out into the world. We want to talk about that. I think the best place to start is with the title. So what do you mean when you talk about a right to politics?
The animal advocacy movement for the past, 50 years, I would say, has focused on defending the idea that animals have moral status. And so Peter Singer famously talked about expanding the moral circle. And Jeff Sebo has a new book about the same idea, expanding the moral circle. The traditional goal has been to get animals into the moral circle. Getting animals into the moral circle is crucial. And there's been actually some success in that, at least as measured by public opinion polls. Most people now agree that animals have a moral status, but it's done very little to date to actually stop this system of animal exploitation. And the reason we think, at least in part, is that animals are not in the political state, in the political circle. So animals increasingly are recognized as having some kind of moral status, but they have no official recognized political status. And I think earlier waves of animal advocates just assumed that if everyone agreed that animals have moral status, that somehow political status would just naturally and inevitably follow. But it's actually really complicated how to figure out the relationship between moral status and political status, even in the human case. The fact that we're all moral equals as human beings doesn't tell us very much about the specific political status or standing or rights of any given individual in relation to any given decision. And so the basic goal of the book is to really shift focus towards this question of political status, political standing, political membership, and in particular, that we should think about animals not just as passive victims, as it were, of human political decision-making, but as political agents in their own right. That when thinking about how to make sure that animals get included in political decision-making, it's not enough to simply try our best to guess what their interests might be and to then advocate for them, but to actually look to see how animals themselves address the challenges of their lives, how they make decisions as individuals and as groups, how they resolve disagreements and differences within their groups. And so one just sort of shorthand for that is that we should think of animals also as having a right to politics. They have a right to exercise control over their lives. In some cases, that right to politics is going to be exercised primarily amongst themselves. A particular flock or herd will make decisions about how they want to act as a group. But in other contexts, humans and animals need to learn how to do politics together. And sometimes we need to think about forms of political decision-making that bring together human political agency and animal political agency. And so part of the goal of the book is just to trace out some of the different possible ways in which humans and animals do politics and do politics separately and do politics together.
Yeah, it is an unbelievably maybe confusing, but it's a startling concept, I think, to most people. You guys have been thinking about this for a while, but for most people are like, well, how would that work? One of the things you mentioned, one of the terms you used was political agents or political agency. Is that the same thing as moral status? If you have I mean, is that a question that has been answered by the people who have delved into the question of moral status, or are there different aspects to political agency?
Yeah, so you can have moral status and moral standing without necessarily having agency or significant amounts of agency. So one could imagine, maybe there are some animals, some beings who can feel pain, there are reasons why we should be concerned about them, because they have experiences, they have a self that experiences things, but they may not be particularly agential in their lives. They may be mostly recipients of things that happen to them, and those things matter, and we should worry about them if they are sentient, feeling, thinking beings. But the agency question is, and specifically the political agency question, are taking us into the realm of action in the world, and making things happen in various ways. And animals differ, I think, significantly in terms of how they are active in the world, the extent to which they are active in the world, and make things happen that can benefit them or their group. And so it's in many ways, a lot of people have been primarily concerned not with agency, but with the question of feeling and thinking, because that's enough, right? That's enough for us to care about what happens, say, to a certain animal. If they're capable of feeling pain, that gives us reasons to not hurt them. And so a lot of theorists, I think, have approached this from the what we call the kind of minimal animal idea, which is we just need to theorize animals. We just need to get them into that moral circle, and the capacity, for example, to feel pain is sufficient for that. But it's not sufficient for being a political animal, and that's what we're concerned with. And that is much more about kinds of agency, and specifically about forms of collective agency. So that's the agency that you have as a member of a community, how you do things with others, how what you can become and do is strongly affected by how others interact with you, how you have ideas as a group about what you want to do or need to do. Here, we're much more into a political realm where there's a lot of navigation that has to go on between members of groups about how to do things, and what the terms of that collective life are. So that's a much more robust idea of agency that we're dealing with there, and we think it's quite crucial. If we just always are talking about moral standing, that can be very important for certain reasons, but it really doesn't help us think about how animals are political animals. That's much more about their purposeful action in the world to do things together.
I keep thinking of my niece. She's 15 now, but when she was 13, and she knows that her aunt has been a vegan animal rights activist for well longer than she's been alive. But apparently she was like at a dinner with her, immediate family. I wasn't there. And they were talking about animal rights. And this is not they're not an animal rights family. And my niece at 13 said, "That's ridiculous. Animals should not have to vote," or something like that. Like she just at 13 had like directly equated animal rights with like giving them the right to vote, which I thought was like kind of funny, and also was like surprised that that's where her 13-year-old brain went. But it does make me think that there is a lot of ignorance out there about just the term animal rights, let alone what you're trying to convey here. Um, how do you bring this message to a more lay crowd? I mean, how do you how do you get this across when we can't even effectively get across the very basic concept that animals deserve rights?
So I think at one place in the book we say that the inner citadel of human supremacism is not actually the question of moral status. It's the question of politics. That when push comes to shove, many humans are willing to acknowledge that animals have moral status, but what we jealously preserve above all is the idea that only humans can do politics, that only humans are zoon political, only humans are political animals. And that's wrapped up with a whole set of ideas about how only humans are able to make choices. So animals are seen as being determined solely by genes. They're genetically predestined to there's only one possible thing they can ever do, and that's been determined by evolution. Whereas humans, alone in the planet, alone in the universe, humans are able to make choices, and that's why we need politics. Is because politics is the process of making collective choices. And so I think that we're not going to make dramatic progress in terms of improving the treatment of animals until we challenge this human supremacism about politics. It's just not enough to say that animals matter because they suffer. That in and of itself does nothing to challenge this idea that politics is a uniquely human capacity and right. And so, I mean, the good thing though is that the ethologists, the animal scientists, have over the past 40 years I mean, there's just this exploding literature which shows that animals have all sorts of different kinds of agency, including collective agency. That there are all sorts of circumstances where groups of animals, herds, flocks, need to make decisions together, and they need to be mechanisms by which they um, negotiate their differences, because there are differences in interests and instincts amongst animals, just as there are amongst humans. And so there's this really exploding literature that tries to document the diverse ways in which a whole variety of animals make collective decisions, um, and often in highly successful ways, not just in the sense that they come to some conclusion, but they're able to do this relatively peacefully. They don't break down into violence, into civil war. That many groups of animals are just as capable of making peaceful collective decisions as humans are. And I think many of those stories, which we many of those studies, we devote a whole chapter of the book to discussing a lot of these findings in ethology. They just provide, in our view, kind of conclusive evidence that animals are political agents. They exercise forms of political agency, and they raise a whole series of fascinating questions, both about how to make sure that we as humans leave room for animals to continue to enact their own form of politics. So how do we make sure we don't get in the way, we don't undermine and subvert the kinds of politics that animals engage in, but also open up this vista for thinking about how we might do politics together. We humans have our traditional ways of doing politics, animals have their traditional ways of doing politics, but sometimes we need to figure out how to do politics together. And that's part of what we're trying to get at in the last third of the book.
Yeah, that really seems like, the really crucial piece as to why this could lead to actual change in the real world if we start to get this theory right and start to see it as beyond just caring for them. And I'm just going to go back to that question that Jasmine's niece asked, because I think it's kind of relevant. I bet you get asked that question really a lot. She's not the only one who came up with that idea, and it's kind of the quintessential response to anybody who claims that animals should have rights. And so do we want to give them the right to vote? And what would that, let's get into a little bit in real world and not just theory. Like, if we're going to do this together in some way, can you give a little, just some ideas of how that actually might work in the real world to give them votes of some sort?
It's important, I think, to think about what is a vote doing, and it's doing a number of things. It's registering your preferences, right? When you vote, it's creating in a democracy, it's creating a situation where everybody gets to register their preferences, and everybody's preferences are taken into account. So it's part of ideas of equality and democracy. It's also something that unfolds over time, right? We vote, and then we vote again, and we vote again. So we can, if we are unhappy, if we voted for a representative who does a bad job, then we can vote them out next time. So voting in elections are mechanisms for us to sanction or correct, the process of politics as it's unfolding. And of course, in the process of elections and voting, we do a great deal of exchange of ideas, deliberation, all kinds of things that hopefully inform the way we vote, or maybe even dramatically change the way we vote. So all of those things are part of voting. And so what we say is basically that doesn't have to be done by, a paper or a automated ballot. How can we capture those things that are part of voting and electoral politics, and transform them into something that humans and animals might do together? And so if we go back, then that's finding out what those preferences and interests and desires are. So it involves a lot of communication with animals and observing them and listening to them. But it also involves opportunities for them in that more deliberative dimension of the voting process, opportunities for them to change us, opportunities for us to change them in our ideas about how we think about things. So for us, that's crucial, because how does that work? Animals aren't going to submit a petition with arguments to try and persuade humans about things. So we think this is profoundly important, that this happens through sort of embodied relationships, right? If we think about how animals change us in our day-to-day lives and how we change them, it's because we have relationships and we build trust and we learn about each other and we see each other in different situations. We change each other. We come to internalize what the other cares about. We experiment with things to try and find out, well, did I understand correctly what this other individual wants, or do we need to change things up to try and get more information? So a much richer idea of what it means to deliberate with others as part of the decision process. And then the other thing I mentioned at the beginning about, well, what are we doing when we're voting? It's also opportunities to choose those who speak for you in a representative situation, to sanction those who don't do well on your behalf. And so we have to think about ways of bringing that in. Like, somehow the decisions that get made have to go back, and animals have to, maybe it's a real world policy change in a town, say, and animals need a chance to then respond to that, right? And maybe they respond negatively, or maybe they start rejecting the person who claims to be speaking for them in a particular situation. Or so we need opportunities to register their dissent, their desire to keep working on a problem that we haven't come to a final decision. And so one of the kinds of models we talk about in the book is, so first of all, we need to sort of open up a geography where humans and animals can be interacting in these ways that allow us to gain information about each other, come to trust each other, make judgments about each other. But then we need people who are tasked with actually making decisions. So it might be individuals who are very close to a particular group of animals and trusted by them, or people with various kinds of expertise for observing animals and so on. But the point is that that can't be the first thing we jump to. That has to come out of this richer situation where animals and humans are encountering each other regularly, doing lots of different things together, where animals have much greater mobility and opportunities. So it has to be more organically tied to a situation of real deliberation of humans and animals. So those are the kinds of ideas that we talk about. What would it mean for the group around a particular animal who help to represent their interests in this very situated or an organic way? What would it mean for that to then feed up to the actual, voting process? And the voting process would might still, the final political decision might still be something that humans do, but it's part of this whole system. So many political theorists now talk about systemic democracy. It's not just the voting moment, it's this whole ecology where animals are having lots of opportunity to change humans.
I'm a political philosopher, and in political philosophy, we've had this interesting shift in democratic theory from what was called a vote-centric theory of democracy to a voice-centric theory of democracy. So a vote-centric theory of democracy says that what matters is that everyone gets a vote. But the evidence shows very clearly that if the only way you participate in politics is by marking a ballot every 4 years, you feel entirely ineffective politically. No one feels they make a difference in the world by marking a ballot once every 4 years. So people have recognized that what's really crucial to democracy is that you're able to articulate your views, that you hope other people listen, that you're able to be involved in some exchange of ideas. And then voting is the last moment. And as Sue says, it's iterative. You then vote again and again. But what gives people a sense of efficacy is voice, not vote. That there be some mechanism by which you are able to make proposals to others and you're able to express your views about other people's proposals. And unfortunately, in political philosophy, people have interpreted this idea of voice-centric democracy in highly human terms. So they've assumed you need to use human language to engage in voice, to articulate proposals. But what a lot of us have been working on over the past 15 years is showing that animals engage in political voice. They are making proposals to us. As you walk down the street with your dog, but also as you walk through the park, you look at what the squirrels are doing, what the birds are doing. We can interpret them as engaged in this kind of voice-centric democracy. They're making proposals to us about how they want to share public space. We can make proposals to them. It's this embodied iterative form. But so much of what political philosophers have been discussing lately under the concept of a voice-centric democracy is can be applied to the way in which we interact with animals. I mean, so the older model of a kind of vote-centric democracy, if all you're focused on, if you're defining democracy as just marking a ballot every 4 years, then it's hard to see how it applies to animals. But this much richer idea of a voice-centric democracy, we think has lots of opportunity for including animals.
Yeah, it strikes me that this is a very difficult time, I think, for anybody in the US to think of like we're trying desperately to hang on to the vote, like that's the project. To I keep thinking of objections, well, it would inevitably be unfair. It would inevitably be misinterpreted. Who could you put in charge? They would exploit, because, and of course we do see that tremendously with animals, that the people who speak for animals are very frequently misrepresenting what must be their interests. But I mean, I am trying to get at this head of appreciating that we could go beyond the moment where we are and actually think of justice again, and as a real concept, and actually get to applying it to animals. But I think even when people do that, I mean, you talk about these various approaches that have been taken, like one of them I think is wardship, critical resistance, and cosmopolitan inclusivity. I mean, none of those, except maybe for wardship, none of those titles are obvious, I think, to people what they mean. But could you kind of break down why, either go into them specifically, or why the people who are trying to represent animals now, and actually are trying, the models they're using aren't enough? Is that a right way of putting that?
Yes. So the wardship model, we also call it sometimes the consideration of interest model. So this is the idea that to bring animals, so all these theorists are concerned with bringing animals into politics, into that political circle that Will was talking about. So how do we do that? For on a wardship model, the idea is that, well, no, animals themselves aren't political agents, so they can't participate in this process that we've just been talking about directly, but they have interests. And those interests must be represented when humans make decisions. So humans are obliged to take account of those interests. And so what that requires is that, humans who know animals, human experts, define what their interests are. And then there's various schemes out there for how those would be incorporated into parliaments or other forms of legislature, legal and political decision making. But the fundamental idea is that, unlike with humans, where we think it's important that their voice be part of the process, the idea is that animals, they don't need to voice anything here. Humans have the expertise to know what animals' interests are. And many theorists in this area tend to assume that animals have a fairly limited number of interests. Like they have a lot, some basic needs and wants, but we can identify those. And it's where we should be focusing on is making sure that those are taken into account in human decision making. So that's inadequate for all the reasons that we've been talking about, right? No, animals are agential. They want control over their lives. They have ways of doing things that we should value, and moreover, just as when we think about human democracy, that even if you think about adults and children, for example, adults always want to think that they know better what children's needs are or what's best for them. And of course, we then, as children grow up, have this very complicated process of assessing that changeover to their taking more control over their lives. But the point is that we always tend to underestimate the agential desires and longing and capacities of others, and especially humans vis-a-vis animals. We just assume that we know better, that there are all kinds of things that they don't understand, that we're better at judging what their needs and interests are. But that's not the point. The point is they have their own lives. They have ways that they want to lead them. And so there has to be, in the political process, a recognition that they have that capacity and desire and right to be self-determining. So that's our issue with the wardship approach, is that it doesn't acknowledge that. It just thinks that there is kind of objective interests that need to be represented. There isn't a process there that animals need to be part of. The resistance, there are a lot of critical animal theorists in recent years who've done this wonderful work on thinking about animal resistance and identifying cases of animal resistance. So this is, animals pushing back in all kinds of ways on how humans treat them, how humans govern them. And so this is definitely a way of recognizing animals as agents, right? This is animals not just being victims, not just taking what's meted out to them, but but fighting back against those trainers or breaking out of that zoo or slaughterhouse or whatever it is. And so this is important because it is focused on animals' agency, but it's our concern here is that the limitation is that agency isn't just about saying no. It's not just about fighting against the things that don't work for us and that we don't want. The kinds of agency that we're really focused on in this book are sort of positive forms of collective agency. So when we need to get things done together as a group, all the things that we collectively need to organize and manage and take care of. And so, so, both of these models that I've discussed so far, I mean, there are important elements of those that are part of our story. And of course, attending to animal resistance is crucially important. But our worry is that it's not enough, and that we need to think about sort of legitimate forms of collective agency, not just fighting against illegitimate forms of government and power. And a lot of people working in the critical animal studies tradition are maybe not anarchists, but have a lot of issues with the state and state power, and so it's understandable that they're focused more on resistance type stories than on this kind of positive dimensions of collective political agency. So that's the limit there. And actually, Will, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about the cosmopolitanism.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the first one, the wardship model. We have a long discussion about why that's people's initial instinct when it's pointed out that animals' interests aren't taken into account in politics. Many people's natural instinct is to say, okay, let's appoint someone who will speak on behalf of animals. So we call this politics on behalf of animals. And it's a perfectly natural reaction, and many city governments and others have appointed someone to speak on behalf of animals, and in that way try to include animal interests. But as Sue said, I mean, there are lots of reasons for thinking that it's a part of the story, but it can't be the whole story. And just one of them is that on many of the most important issues, we think, we humans just are not in a position to know what animals want. So if one of the purposes of politics and of democracy is to find out, what people want, what their preferences are, we do not yet know what many of the most important questions animals face. So for example, if and when we abolish factory farming, if and when we abolish animal agriculture, we are confronted with the question of what kinds of lives do horses, cows, pigs, chickens want to lead? I mean, it's amazing that we've lived with these animals for millennia, but we actually do not know what kinds of lives would they like to lead if they've been liberated from industrial factory farming. Or and there are actually lots of different possible lives they could lead, and some places, like some animal sanctuaries, are trying to give animals an opportunity to explore different possible lives. But this is a process of exploration. And in our view, politics, it's not just about counting existing preferences or existing votes. It's a process of learning and exploring together. And so if we're going to figure out a just future with animals, it's something we need to learn together, explore together. And so we need to think about politics as not just having a human speak on behalf of animals. We need to think about what would be spaces and places where humans and animals can collectively experiment, learn. Okay, and so that's one of our reasons for thinking that the wardship model is just not going to be enough, because we just don't know. We don't know what animals think about many of the most important questions about the future. So the third option that we look at is cosmopolitanism. And it's interesting here that for many animal advocates, and this too goes back to Peter Singer, but it's found across a much wider range of traditions and schools of thought within animal ethics and animal politics. It's assumed that animals will do better in a world in which we get rid of borders and boundaries, and we all just become more kind of cosmopolitan in our political identities. So clearly, any animal rights view is committed to the view that animals have moral status. And so moral status expands beyond the family, beyond the tribe, beyond the nation, beyond the human to animals. So all animal ethics is cosmopolitan in the moral sense that it views moral status as expanding beyond any delimited social group or national group or nation state or whatever. But we're interested in political cosmopolitanism, which is the idea that political boundaries should be weakened or dissolved, which could take the form of trying to create a global democracy. And there's a lot of interest in the idea of one of our interlocutors, Alistair Cochrane, defends this idea of a kind of cosmopolitan interspecies global democracy. Or it could take the form of what we call terrestrial cosmopolitanism, which is the idea that the world belongs to all of us in common. And this is an idea that's actually quite popular across a range of theories of animal ethics and animal politics, that we shouldn't think about groups of humans or groups of animals as having rights to particular bits of territory. We should instead thinking about all the world belonging to all of us in common. And our view is that both political cosmopolitanism, the idea of a kind of global democracy, and terrestrial cosmopolitanism, the idea that the world is a commons that belongs to all of us, all of these would in practice operate to license basically colonizing wild animal habitat, that both would operate to justify the larger numbers of people all over the world staking claims to the resources on wild animal habitat, staking claims to moving into their territory, and in ways that would be intensely disruptive for their lives, including their forms of politics. So what we try to do in the book is hammer over and over again that this capacity for animals to engage in politics is dependent on particular kinds of environments. So we use the term holding environments. And this is going to vary from type of animal to type of animal, depending on the nature of their sociality, the nature of their environmental niche, their habitat. But that for non-human animals and indeed for human animals, our ability to effectively participate in processes of collective decision-making are tied to relationships. They're tied to particular kinds of social relationships, social groupings, and particular kinds of habitats and territories. And so we try to document this in a variety of ways across a number of different chapters, but we keep arguing that we need to resist what we call the cosmopolitan temptation. We need to resist the temptation that it would be a better world for animals if we just stopped thinking about boundaries and borders, if we stop thinking about us and them, and we all just think of ourselves as earthlings who share a single earth in common. That's a very common view in a lot of different versions of animal ethics. And we actually think it could be a disaster for animals. It actually licenses, it provides the grounds for the interests and preferences of humans everywhere around the world to be staking claims over the resources and habitats and lives of animals. And so our it's one of the crucial goals of the book is to insist that if animals have a right to politics, this needs to be understood as tied. It comes in a bundle. Their right to politics is in part a right to maintain a holding environment that sustains their politics. And the holding environment that sustains their politics is a territory. It may be a territory that they migrate from one to another. I mean, it's complicated how do we think about territorial rights in the case of animals. but that we need to think seriously about what are the social and ecological circumstances and conditions that make possible stable and effective forms of collective decision making. And they're not going to be cosmopolitan. They're going to be bounded. And we need to think seriously about what are good boundaries. Good fences make good neighbors. What are the kinds of boundaries and borders that work well to sustain effective holding environments for humans and animals to engage in forms of politics? So we want to put that on the agenda for animal theorists and activists to think about going forward, that we need to, we think, resist this kind of knee-jerk opposition to everything that because there's a lot of this out there that people just have knee-jerk opposition to boundaries and borders, and just think that the world would be a better place if we stopped distinguishing insiders from outsiders, us, them, members, non-members, citizens, aliens, that we all just had a single, we were all just earthlings on the earth. Our argument in the book is that would come at a very high price for a lot of that would render vulnerable many animals, including their ability to engage in any form of politics.
I love your concept of the minimal animal and how it shapes what changes we seek for them. And I'm curious, in what ways do we have to change the way we think about who animals are? I mean, that's a process which even the most avid animal advocate has probably only just started. So does that have to come first?
Well, so certainly the openness to it has to come first. I mean, our view of all these things is it's a process that we have to undertake, right? So in many ways, what we're trying to do in our book is set some parameters or lay out some ideas about how to embark on a process where we get to know animals as the varied and complex and rich beings that they are, rather than being locked into either, we're locked into some bad scientific ideas that luckily are starting to fade. We're locked into, eons of human supremacy and how we think about animals. We're locked into how we see them currently, right? It's very hard to see beyond the existing current places where animals are and what it looks like they are capable of being based on what we see on a farm or what we see in a town that where dogs are walking around on leashes. So we have to move beyond all those limitations, all those ways that encourage us to think in terms of the minimal animal. And so a lot of the project for us is about, yes, how do we start to open up ways for us to see animals differently? And so we have that chapter on all the kind of scientific evidence. And I think that goes a long way. I think people watching documentaries about animals or reading about animals can start to move beyond these traditional ideas we've had about that they're just kind of operating either on instinct or by simple mechanisms of response to their environment and seeing the complexity. But it also does involve, we've talked about just opening up these spaces for interaction. Because, I mean, if you just think about the conversations you've probably had with people over the years about moments of insight or moments of change in their relationship with animals, it is often a relationship, right? It is often an encounter or a series of encounters where they've been pushed out of the way that they were slaughtering animals in some sort of limited perspective. And realizing that not only that there's a lot more going on, but starting to think about, well, what's possible once you realize the complexity of what animals are doing, then, I mean, the possibilities for what we might do together we just, as Will said earlier, we just really haven't even started asking that question, let alone exploring that question of what that openness actually might look like.
So you asked, does challenging the minimal animal come first? In the book, we single out these two targets. One is the minimal animal, which is the idea basically that animals are capable of suffering, but nothing else. And so
Exactly.
they're not capable of learning, they're not capable of developing, they're not capable of any forms of negotiation and deliberation and politics. It is what we're particularly interested in. So that's one problem. But the other problem, the other target, is what we call the capacity contract as a view about politics. So the capacity contract is the idea that politics is best understood as a process by which the competent, those who are capable, govern the incompetent. And so the capacity contract thinks about politics as an agreement amongst the competent about how they're going to share power, including the power to govern the incompetent. And that is equally, I want to say that's a kind of co-priority in the book. We want to challenge the minimal animal, but I actually don't think we can fully challenge the minimal animal unless we also challenge the capacity contract as a picture of politics. Because that idea that politics is this kind of vehicle by which the competent govern the incompetent, it's not just bad for animals, it's also bad for children, it's bad for people with cognitive disabilities. But it also just completely misunderstands how politics works for all of us. That in order to have any plausible account about how we, humans and animals, how we engage in these processes of learning, exploring, resolving disagreements, we need a much more embodied idea about how people are expressing their views, how they are resisting things they find objectionable, how they make proposals to others. And so I think we need this richer picture about what politics looks like at the same time as we develop a richer picture of animals. And our hope is that these two actually work together, that as soon as we get a bit richer idea of politics, it's going to be much easier to see the ways in which animals are rich, including rich in politics. And similarly, attending to animal politics helps to reveal the sterility and the absurd narrowness of the inherited idea of politics as this capacity contract.
I mean, I think this just seems like such an important question, like for what animal advocates are actually doing in the real world right now, because the whole goal is very much some of the most substantial goals in animal welfare are based on a very minimal animal. I'm thinking particularly of cage-free campaigns, and I want to get them out of those battery cages as much as anybody, but I'm not against cage-free campaigns. I think I pulled this quote. Some animal rights theorists think that focusing on the minimal animal has strategic benefits. Can you explain what you mean by that? And whether I always wonder, like, I'm all for cage-free campaigns, but I don't understand what the next step is, because they're sort of based on the idea that that's all those chickens need. So that's something I'm struggling with a lot right now. I'm just curious to know, like, how that fits into this theory.
So what we mean by choosing it or for strategic reasons. So what is the strategic reason for focusing on the minimal animal? I think what many advocates think is that to have the best chance of success in terms of, say, accomplishing at least something valuable for animals, something good for animals, is to rest your strategy and to rest your arguments on premises that nobody can reasonably disagree with, right? So uncontroversial premises, right? So almost nobody is going to disagree except, industry stalwarts, that it's a good life for a chicken to live in a tiny little cage, and that doesn't cause suffering and boredom and all kinds of things. And we don't need to have an elaborate story about what the chicken's life could be or all the forms of agency that she might be able to exercise in order to see that it's wrong for her to be in that cage. She's a being who can suffer. She's clearly suffering. So we need to change up those cages. And so the strategic idea is that you make an argument that nobody can disagree with, right? Nobody's going to come back and say, oh, well, but those, nobody now can on solid grounds dispute things about animals feeling pain or engaging in stereotype behaviors when they're enclosed or things like that. However, when it comes to things like exercising political agency, you're going to get a lot more dispute. I mean, you're going to get a lot of confusion and questions about what that means, as we've been discussing, but you're also going to get a lot more dispute about, well, how do we interpret? So when elephants are following the matriarch, how do we know that that's because they're choosing to recognize her leadership? And so engaging in a form of politics rather than that they're just defaulting to some sort of more innate or instinctive mechanism of following, say. You're gonna get a lot more arguments. So a lot of people say, listen, the situation for animals is so catastrophic. We haven't got anywhere, or we haven't got very far. We should take the gains where we can get them. And the gains we can get are the ones that we can, nobody can argue with, basically. So yes, there's going to be a political or economic fight, but nobody's going to disagree about what we're aiming for and whether it's justified. So I think a lot of animal advocacy and a lot of, theoretical work too, sort of explicitly or not, is making that kind of assessment about the situation.
So I think what Sue said is one version of the strategic reason for just invoking the minimal animal. But the other one that we discuss is there's been a reaction in the animal advocacy movement against prioritizing some species that are seen as closest to humans. And so, a lot of the initial advocacy was for primate rights, the Great Ape Project, and so on. And at times, it looked like animal advocates were playing into a game in which the value of an animal's life depended on how close they were, how much they approximated a human life. And animal advocates, I think, have rightly backed off from or want to avoid engaging in forms of advocacy that just reaffirm human supremacy by setting up the human as the standard that other animals need to meet. And the minimal animal, as just based on suffering, serves that purpose of avoiding playing into these kind of human supremacist tropes. And I think some people worry that our focus on a right to politics could have the effect of, like, we're saying that the right to politics is a right of the members of of social groups of animals, herds, flocks, and so on, if and when they have the need to resolve certain kinds of disagreements. And so, like, on our view, this is crucial to the well-being of those groups, is to understand that they have forms of politics. And in thinking about their rights, we need to think about what rights will enable them to maintain and affirm and sustain their forms of politics. But it does, I think for some people, they worry that if you go beyond suffering and you start to ask about, well, can animals engage in politics? Then the answer is going to be, well, maybe some animals can and some animals can't. And then it's going to look like we're privileging some animals over other animals based on whether they can or can't do this or that kind of activity. And so this is an issue that we try to address in the book, that when we insist on the importance of recognizing animals' right to politics, this shouldn't come at the expense of protecting the basic rights of all sentient animals. And so we're not trying to establish a hierarchy. We're not trying to say that the value of an animal's life depends on how much they do or do not engage in politics. We're just trying to emphasize that for many animals, their well-being and their flourishing does indeed depend on their ability to engage in politics, and that there's no way to negotiate, no way for us to learn and explore and discover what interspecies justice could look like unless and until we're willing to engage in politics with animals. That's what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. So why do scientists who study animal behavior and who presumably have a much richer idea of who animals are tend to maintain a very reductive view of them? Or am I wrong? Is this changing?
I think it's changing now. Change is always, happening more in some areas than others. It's fits and starts. But I'm actually curious about this. I was thinking about this recently. Boy, if I went back to high school or an undergraduate, science education, what would I be learning about animals at this point? I actually have no idea. But my suspicion, based on what scientists are writing about, is that it would look entirely different than what I was taught in the 70s and 80s. So I think many animal scientists are still very careful about the kind of language they use, and they are much more comfortable talking about animals' behavior from an external perspective, much less comfortable speculating about what animals are thinking about and feeling while they're doing things. And so a few minutes ago, I talked about the case of animal leadership. So of a matriarch, say, in an elephant family group, and those who follow her. And as we know, matriarchs, it's not just a single matriarch. So often leadership in an elephant community is dispersed amongst various competent adults. But the leaders, they have long experience, knowledge. They know where you go to get water in a drought season. They know how to handle a threat from lions when they have young calves. They know how to meet up with the rest of the clan at different times of year for various purposes. And so their leadership is crucial, but many animal scientists will describe that from the outside. They'll describe what's happening, but they won't necessarily take the step to think about, okay, so if I'm a young adolescent elephant and I'm following the matriarch, what's driving that? Like, why am I following her because I respect her judgment, because I know that's, because she's gotten us out of tricky situations before, and so I know that it's a good idea to trust her judgment and to do what she advises. Am I doing it just because that's what my friend elephant beside me is doing, or because that's what my mom, who's also part of the group, is suggesting that is leading me to do that? There's all kinds of possibilities there, and um, and and in many ways, I don't think they are out of reach for us, but I think we're a long way from understanding a lot of that sort of those internal mechanisms that animals are doing when they are following the norms of a group, or engaging in decision making as a group, or all the things that are politics. And so I think scientists are giving us more and more richer and richer data from the outside that we can then start to hypothesize with, speculate with, learn from, devise. They're starting to devise different kinds of studies that try to get at some of these internal mechanisms of either of following norms, of respect, of leadership, of um, desire to be part of the group, a sense of group belonging, all of these kinds of complex things that are parts of politics. So that is coming. So I think scientists are giving us a lot more tools, and one of the things we try to do in the book is just describe some of that science in a way that we think is fairly compelling, that about what must be going on internally for these animals, and that they really are making deliberate choices. They're dealing with conflicts. They're exercising toleration and self-control in situations where they're not getting, the group is making a decision that they're maybe not happy with. All of these things that we think of as part of that crucial practice of politics versus just that bullies always get their way and despots rule, but that it's a much more negotiated and navigated. But that's about psychology, not just about external behavior. And so I think we're starting to investigate those things. We're starting to ask some of the right questions. And I think we have more and more tools for doing that.
Another way to put that is that science has, I think now, here's how I'd say science has progressed in a way that's good for animal advocates. I think scientists have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that for many, many social animals, they do in fact make decisions. They have choices. They are not pre-programmed by genes. There's lots of different studies that show that there are times and places where they need to make choices about in which direction to move, how they're going to what kind of food, and how they're going to deal with self-defense and so on. So we know they make choices, and there's growing evidence that those decisions are not made only by the alpha male. Like, this was the model that I was raised with. Sue's talking about what model of animal life were you raised with? So when I was raised, I was taught that, there's always the alpha male who's a bully and who intimidates everyone else to come follow the rule of the alpha male. And that model has been conclusively refuted for a very wide range of social animals. We know that the authority is dispersed. There isn't just one male who makes all the decisions. Different animals in the group make different decisions, but also that those decisions are not complied with out of intimidation or as a result of threats of violence. And so both of those, I think, are two huge steps in the direction of recognizing animal politics. But as Sue says, what's missing, or what's only partially started, is, okay, to my mind, if you take those two steps, then the next obvious step to take is to theorize that what's going on within that animal group is a process of political negotiation, contestation, learning, but also reconciliation. When you lose a decision, there needs to be some mechanism for reconciling winners and losers. But many scientists are not yet willing to use this language of creating legitimate authority, respecting authority, acknowledging the legitimacy of decisions like that. They're still worried that using this language assumes too much about what's going on inside the head of the animal in a way that's inaccessible. And so there's still a gap between the description. I think we just need to acknowledge this, that the way we're describing what's going on is often one step beyond the way many scientists themselves would describe it. But in our view, given what they have already shown about the fact that these behaviors are not biologically programmed and they're not the result of alpha male tyranny, we have no alternative but to start theorizing it in other ways. And that's what we're trying to do.
So fascinating, what is going on in their heads. And I want to ask you a question about emotion, but actually, I think we have to end the interview here because I know you have an appointment, and I know we've gone way over. But I have one more question that I want to bring us back to, and it's about, because we're here in the U.S. and all we can think of is politics, pretty much, and that's not just here in the U.S. I mean, it's a politically fraught time for a lot of people. Do you think this means it's a moment of possibility as well as a moment of fearfulness in rethinking how the world works, and including for animals? Is this an important moment for us to be thinking about how the world could change?
I hope it is. I mean, I find myself very fearful about the current situation. But I also imagine that there are going to be lots of sort of unpredictable fallout from the place that we are now. And that means that we should be ready, right? I mean, sometimes I say, why am I working
Exactly.
on this? Like, I
Exactly.
despair. But that in my better moments, I think, okay, we need to be ready. Is there going to be a moment that arises? Is there going to be a general insistence, for example, that we renew our ideas of democracy? Like, what are we doing here? Like, how do we have a politics where all kinds of people don't feel alienated and excluded to the extent that they're doing crazy things? How are we going to do democratic renewal? Well, maybe that's a moment, right? Where, well, maybe if we think about politics in this more capacious way by looking at, and we look at how animals do politics, and not just learn from that, but think about how we can and do it all together. Maybe that's a project of democratic and political renewal that we could get people excited about at the right moment. And I think there's many other things too. I mean, there's quite a few different kinds of political ideas that we're dealing with in the book, and I think in various cases, yeah, it's I don't have any immediate hopeful expectations, but I do feel the seriousness of being ready with the best ideas that we can pull together, all of the animal advocacy community, so that we don't miss the chance, if there is a chance.
Well, that's a beautiful way of ending. Just remind our listeners the name of your book and how they can follow your work.
So the book is Animals and the Right to Politics, and it's published by Oxford University Press.
I'm just jumping in here to clarify the information about ordering the book, because I'm sure a lot of you will want to do so. The hardcover was published in December of 2025 and is available from Oxford University Press worldwide, so you can order it there. The paperback will be available, and I think that probably will be a lot more affordable, from March 2026. I hope some of you will be ordering it. It's a pretty serious book, but it's really important.
Well, thank you. This is all really fascinating. And, the day that we're recording this, I haven't even connected with Marianne about this yet, but the day we're recording this, I saw this article that just came out from New York Magazine called How Veganism Got Cooked. Plant-based eating was supposed to be the future, then meat came roaring back. And, I think that things just wax and wane, and there is no linear path to liberation. But you're giving us a lot to chew on and a lot of hope, I think. So that's a really great way of ending it. And I want to thank both of you, Will Kymlicka, I did it, and Sue Donaldson, much easier to say. Both of you for joining us today in our hen house, and I hope you'll stick around for just a few minutes for our bonus flock content. But for those of you who are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. As I said earlier, subscribe on your favorite podcatcher or on YouTube. And if you're interested in the bonus content, which I think sometimes it's really fascinating because everyone's all kind of geared up already. And I don't think you'll want to miss this bonus content, I can already tell. So go to ourhenhouse.org/support to become a flock member. We'll talk to you next time.